Welcome into the Landon Tengwall Show, brought to you by Arbor Wealth Management. Today, we welcome back our neighborhood-friendly producer, Jesse. Jesse, how are you doing today, my man?
I'm doing pretty good. Usually after a heartbreaking Penn State loss, I'm down in the dumps for a couple of days, but the season being where it was, I kind of saw it coming. I had people text me, "Hey, what's your pulse check? Pulse check." And I'm like, the pulse is high, but I don't have any belief that we've shown the ability to go out and close the game in high leverage situations, which reared its ugly head once again. Now we get to watch another Indiana play get played over and over for the years to come. First it was Penix on the pylon. Now it's Omar Cooper in the back of the end zone. So I can't wait to watch that play for the rest of my life. It's great.
What was there ever a moment where they had you, like Penn State, where you're like, "We're going to win this thing," or did you never fully believe? Did you think we were going to Penn State it, if you will?
I love making that a verb.
Yeah, right.
After the first defensive stop, I was like, it felt like it was all kind of culminating into that situation. I'm like, the offense is finally going, and we're going to be able to. All we need is a couple first downs. We've actually shown the willingness to throw the ball and be aggressive. Hey, this is it. And then we reverted back. And so there was maybe a minute or two there when the offense had a chance to ice the game and never give the ball back to Indiana for them to go on their game-winning drive. But in the back of my mind, it's just sort of been the story of the year. Penn State is able to go and snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
I had that right here. I was gonna, because that was the greatest quote that you put out on Twitter. I was like, that is Penn State. Really, the last like 8 or 9 years, but specifically this game for sure. It never feels. When Zane Durant got that sack, I'll admit I fully was in. I was like, oh my God, we're gonna win this thing. And then 18 yards up the seam the next play, and it's like, okay,
28. But don't discount the Indiana offense. There it's 28 yards right up the seam, first down, and that's when I immediately knew, oh no, this isn't going to happen, is it? And then beautiful catch after beautiful catch, and yeah, that was tough to watch, but at the same time, it's happened every game. So if you've been watching Penn State all season, it's not a shocker. Everyone's going to go and say, "Oh, that was a great drive by Mendoza," and I don't want to take anything away from him or the offense, but Penn State allowing explosive passes has been their Achilles heel for almost the entirety of the season. So just to see it happen all in that one drive over and over and over again, it was just sort of like, yeah, this feels like the last sort of big game of the season with the way that the schedule broke down and everything, and it's just not surprising.
Yeah, but before we get into our takes and talk about if we're overreacting, underreacting, all that good stuff, I want to put just a bow on this Indiana game. Why did we lose in your eyes watching the tape? Like what went wrong against Indiana for Penn State not to be able to pull off that upset?
So Penn State's not normally in the position of being the hunter versus being the hunted, and this was the opportunity for that to really flip. And especially when you have an interim head coach, you just expect. Like the way I like to put it is an interim head coach should be feeling like they're stealing the car and they have to drive it away. Where it felt like we just went the speed limit the entire game. And so you can do that. And you can argue that we had more talent or whatever you want. But ultimately in the high leverage situations or just generally, I don't think we were aggressive enough. We played way too conservative in the first half. I think we had 28 total yards in the first quarter. Second quarter was a little bit better. Most of that was on just one explosive play, which is like, oh wait, guys, we can throw the ball downfield. Then they sort of found the offense, but two big reasons is just being conservative on offense. I might get into it a little bit in my overreactions when we talk about some of that stuff, but I think people are overlooking what the middle eight impact was in this game. Now, for those of you who don't know, the middle eight is the final 4 minutes of the first half and the first 4 minutes of the second half. And Penn State got the opening kickoff in the second half, and we still lost the middle eight 13-0. That's a really hard thing to do. So when you look at it in that sort of sense, Indiana only ended up scoring however many, 20 points, right? So they ended up scoring over 50% of their points in the 8-minute period because of 2 turnovers. And ultimately, hey, you can fight back and claw back, but spotting them that in that circumstance off of conservative play calling at the end of each half was probably sort of the main thing that I'm looking at is, hey, if you have a chance to go for the jugular, you got to take it, especially against a team coming into your house. You have the home crowd behind you. You had a chance on that final. So you had a chance on the second last series on second and third down to go for the first down. You run it on second down, nothing. You throw, once again, Andy Kolnicki. I think he probably listened to the song The Eagles, Take It to the Limit, but he misheard it and said, take it to the gimmick. And that's exactly what he tried to do on that third down. He tried to, hey, let's do this big old shift, try to get this tight end who's lined up as tackle, get him downfield open. Indiana was all over it, ends up in a pass to the flat. Hey, maybe just line up and let your receivers or your skill players and Grunkemeyer make a throw downfield, at least throw the ball past the sticks, knowing that, hey, all we need is one reception past the sticks. This game's over. But didn't take it. I don't really have much to say about the defense. I thought Jim Knowles had a really good game plan, aggressive, trying to get in Mendoza's face. And towards the end of the game, it's just one of those situations to where the linebackers have never been good in pass coverage this year. The secondaries had holes. They weren't trying to get beat for the 40 plus, 50 plus yard play over the top. So they just were taking chunks and chunks and chunks out, and they made the plays when it mattered. So when it comes to Indiana game, that's sort of the way I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I made the point too about that final, we call it 4-minute offense where you're just trying to drain the clock. And I made the point, there was 2:08, 2:09 left on the clock. No matter what, Terry Smith and everybody's response would be, well, we wanted to, get it down to the 2-minute warning. Number one, I think if you have 2 minutes left, even under the 2-minute warning and no timeouts in college football, that's an eternity because the clock stops after first downs. Like if you have 2 minutes, I don't care if you're on your own 5-yard line. I don't even think time is that much of an issue. And so you got 2:08 left. I think 4 to 5 seconds on a pass play is happening no matter what. And the punt is going to take 4 to 5 seconds. No matter what, they're getting the ball after the 2-minute warning. So it didn't make sense not just take a chance. Like you didn't have to run the clock on that play. It wasn't going to affect anything. They were getting the ball after that 2-minute warning no matter what. So yes, frustrating, but we continue to have this conservative side to us, that we just always want to play not to lose instead of playing to win. And I think that is the number one thing I want to get on our next head coach, someone that goes for the jugular. All right, Jesse and I are going to play a game of Am I Overreacting? So we will go back and forth. We're going to give statements, and the other person will say if it's valid, if it's an overreaction. We'll see if we have any pushback. So ready to get into it, Jesse?
Oh, I'm ready. Hit me with your first.
All right.
Are you overreacting?
Am I overreacting that Andy Kotelnicki, and I'll mix in James Franklin in this as well, ruined Drew Aller? And I say that because there's so many things I look back to. My number one piece of that is Drew Aller's best game ever statistically and film-wise was his first game ever, West Virginia 2023. So I think anytime someone's best game ever is their first game ever, I have to kind of look at the coaching there and see where they continue to not be put in good positions. It just his entire career just felt everything was so conservative. And we started to look and give a lot of praise for Drew Aller having this great touchdown to interception ratio. And it was like, oh, that's cool, but it's because we didn't throw the football down the field. He never took any risk. And part of that was because you have a head coach that admittedly would say to him, if we've heard it, that if you're not going to hit the deep ball perfectly, you got to underthrow it. And I'm like, first off, like what kind of coaching point is that for someone that used to be a wide receivers coach? Like, how about tell him to put the ball on the money? How about that? I would enjoy that. Give your guys some confidence. But then the other piece of that too, it's clear we just were not, especially this year, we weren't calling plays to throw the football down the field. And there's proof of that in the fact that Terry Smith was asked in this game, hey, how did we finally get these downfield passes? Terry Smith's response was, well, we finally started to call plays to throw the ball down the field. So what? We weren't doing that? Why was Kotelnicki not doing that? So that's why it leads me into saying Kotelnicki and James Franklin ruined Drew Aller. Your response?
That's the exact proper reaction. I think you go back and look at the offense that Drew Aller ran in high school. Now, albeit it's high school football, but he was in shotgun and running 5 wide. And he was basically allowed to read the field and make throws vertically or just say, hey, here's where the open gap is and everything. And then we bring him into our system with Mike Yurcich. And like the first time I ever watched Drew Aller was him going on the road at Purdue against Jeff Brom and coming in for a series and being like, oh, wow, this kid has it. And then we see the first game of the West Virginia game last 2 seasons ago. And we're like, oh boy, this is finally it. This is what we've been waiting for. And then from there, just sort of curtailed. It continued to go down and down and down, like you sort of said. And I just don't think that there was ever a marriage there between either Yurcich or Kotelnicki, because both of their offenses centered around having a mobile quarterback. And I think that was probably the biggest thing that happened to Drew Aller was, hey, thank you so much for committing to Penn State, but we're never going to put you in an offensive scheme that really matches your talents. And I feel like that's the biggest job for an offensive coordinator. It's let me look at my personnel, and I don't need to fit a square peg into a round hole. I need to fit that square peg and build a square hole for him to fit into. And that just never really happened. I thought there's some advanced metrics that got tweeted out. I forget who it was. I wish I could give them credit, but it was literally like the average, the expected EPA on passes as you go further and further downfield. And Drew Aller was short. And then as the throw went longer down the field, it started to go way up. And so you're looking at some of these metrics being like, hey, Drew Aller can throw a deep ball. Just why aren't we doing it? Why are we being so conservative? I mean, the explosive play rate I'm about to get into with my overreaction, which I know is not an overreaction, but we can talk about it. But to see what happened with Drew Aller, it's like, hey, we had to have him get mobility and stuff like that. Well, also in the NFL, like, yeah, you kind of want that. But in terms of draft stock and everything, I think he has the arm and all that. And you're sort of coming out of it being like, oh, this is a surefire first round draft pick. So now it's like, hey, I hope this guy gets taken in the second round, or is he now a day two pick? And so when you have that sort of arc as a quarterback with a program, a lot of that falls on coaching. Some of it may fall on Aller. He may go to the NFL and have issues, and I wish him all the best at the next level. I want to see him succeed. But I definitely think that there is a component there that the coaching staff failed Drew Aller. You gave him a run game, never gave him receivers. I mean, he made Tyler Warren his number one receiver, but like, who was Drew Aller's number one receiver for his entire career there? It's going to be no one like Harrison Wallace. Like, I guess that's who you're going to go with in that, but never really had anyone to really mesh. And like, I always thought Drew Aller was a big arm, and they never took advantage of it. And if you can't take advantage of what you think is your prospect or your quarterback's best trait, then you are failing him. So I completely agree with you. Not an overreaction. You may not be reacting enough to it.
All right, I love it. Your take?
All right. Am I overreacting? I'm not. This Penn State offensive scheme that we ran this season was the worst by any Power Four program that I have seen this decade. It befuddling. There's not enough adjectives to describe my vitriol, my hatred for what we did this year. We came in, we returned 4 offensive line starters. We returned both of our star tailbacks, our star third-year starting quarterback. We go and get 3 portal wide receivers. We have a really deep tight end room. And all that, this year, when you're looking at the Penn State roster, you kind of knew that the defense, even with Jim Knowles coming in, hey, there might be some growing pains, but we don't have an Abdul Carter this year. We don't have that key star player that's going to just lift the entire unit. We have a bunch of good players, but there's a bunch of other questions. I thought coming into this year, this had to be the year where the offense had to sort of lift up the defense, where in years past, it's always been the defense lifting up the offense. But you look at our offense in general, and outside of being 52nd in points per game, and a lot of that's boasted and boosted by those 3 G5 games early on in the season, but then you start to go down it. We're 78th in rush yards per game. How? We're 109th in pass yards per game. How? 110th in total offense. And it all comes back to our inability to be explosive. One, we just didn't go for it. Like, you look at the heat maps for Ethan Grunkemeyer and Drew Aller this season, and there aren't balls going 20 plus yards down the field. Everything is 5 to 10 yards between the line of scrimmage and the sticks. And what that does is it allows the defense to just say, okay, we only have to guard this much of the field. We don't have to worry about our safeties worrying about the over-the-top stuff. So our safeties, instead of lining up at 12 or 15 yards, are now lining up at 8 to 10 yards and helping in run support. And because of that, our explosive play rate this year is just like, it makes me want to pull out my hair. We are 110th in plays of 10 plus, 121st in plays of 20 plus, 128th in plays of 30 plus, and 111th in plays of 40 plus. We only had 4 40-plus yard plays going into the Indiana game. And that was finally in that second half, and later in that second quarter was like finally the first time, hey, let's try to get the ball downfield. We get 2 cat buster plays. So we got half as many cat buster plays in about 10 minutes in that Indiana game than we did the entire season going ahead of time. So I just cannot remember a single instance this season to where the deep balls and the explosives were running. And like I said, with the gimmicks, I this year I just had it with the gimmicks. It was trick plays. Like we for whatever reason, despite having all this talent, we were unable to think that we could generate big explosive plays without having some sort of reverse or some sort of jet sweep pass or a double pass or an awkward screen. Like, do you remember a single instant where any single trick play worked this year?
No, I can't say I do. No.
So, the horizontal air raid has just been a disaster. The explosive runs just aren't there because teams don't respect your ability to throw the ball downfield. So it's like a simple mathematical problem is when you look at the area of the field the defense had to cover, they just said, we don't have to worry about anything behind the safeties. They're not going for it. Can Drew and Grunk throw those passes? Sure, we've seen it when they've been given the ample opportunity. But we never put those guys in positions to succeed. Drew Aller was best when running the 2-minute up-tempo offense. We rarely saw it except for at the end of each half or in a trailing game script. Normally when we scored points with Drew Aller and a quarterback. We saw Grunkemeyer succeed So, like with the deep balls, and they just never came. And so, like this Koldenicki offense has just been an utter disaster. The run scheme doesn't work because there's not a running quarterback. There's no deep balls. Everything's horizontally and going east and west. And I think for the amount of talent that this team had, their inability to succeed on offense, or at least execute in high leverage situations, is just there's no. We were the number 2 preseason team. For it to fall apart this badly, the defense obviously had its hand in that, but the offense should have been so much better than it was. And just to see the scaled back, reduced version, it's like, how do you regress so badly in your second year in the offense? And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, I have to agree. You are not overreacting on this one. I think you look at it and it was all from the second half. Penn State had more 15-yard completions through the air against Indiana than they did against Ohio State, Iowa, and Northwestern combined. And the only reason that you even close is that Northwestern pass. Ross took it 70 yards on a drag. So you talked about the wide receivers and just the expectation for this year. I feel for Trevor Pena. I feel for Devontae Rowe. These guys come in, they're 1,000-yard wide receivers, and their draft stock has plummeted because they came into an offense that is just inept. Koldenicki, I've said he has this scratch that he has to itch 3 to 4 times a game where we have to do something trick play wise, giving Liam Clifford 3 plays where he has the ball in his hand as the quarterback against Ohio State. Like, why do we need to do that? And it's clear there was, I think that was the greatest tweet that you put out, the horizontal air raid. There's no other way to put it. Like, that's perfectly put, because Koldenicki refused to stretch the field. I don't know why. I don't know why he refused to do it. I don't know if there was a lack of confidence, but we saw what happened. Like when Ethan Grunkmeyer was able to say, all right, I'm allowed to stretch the football down the field. You come out of halftime. It was clear there was a conversation of halftime at Indiana with Koldenicki that said, we're going to throw the ball down the field, because Ethan Grunkmeyer came out on that first play and he was throwing that deep post to Ross no matter what. And obviously went incomplete, and then he threw an interception on the next one. But even throwing interceptions, you continued to stay with it, and you saw the result. Penn State was able to win the game. Excuse me. Was able to did not mean that. Did not.
We won that half.
We won the half. We won the half except for the final drives. And so it was and you saw like Nick Singleton. People were like, "Oh, how did he finally, break off a big run?" Well, guess what? We started to throw the ball. So like you said, the DBs had to back off a little bit. There was a lot more respect for the passing game. So that makes the rushing attack a lot more efficient. And so everything leads into, if you do not throw the football deep, your offense is not going to be able to operate how it should. And the defense doesn't have to respect that. And it's going to shut down everything else underneath. So you are not overreacting. Jesse, your third take.
All right. I want to preface this a little bit because I think this one's going to grind some gears within the Penn State community. And people, I already know what the comment section is going to say when I get done saying this. So I'm just prefacing it by saying, hey, let me explain. After the Northwestern loss, Pat Kraft pulled the trigger on James Franklin. James Franklin had won double-digit games each of the prior 3 or 4 seasons up until that point. We hit a really bad skid against what we thought was a bad UCLA team and a bad Northwestern team. It turns out both those teams are actually half decent in the Big Ten race. They aren't the bottom tier teams like they were sort of perceived to be at that point. And so he pulled the trigger, and the fan base is like, okay, let's go. The grass is going to be greener, right? It has to be. Like, let's go and get a great coach. There has to be a master plan if we're doing this now, right? And Penn State still has not won a football game. And with that said, I think firing James Franklin when we did was an utter disaster for this program because of the repercussions. Now, I'm not saying that James Franklin was going to keep his job after the season, but there's probably a discussion point saying like, hey, one bad season, I understand the issues against top 5 teams, but hey, there's no clear solution to that. Like, James Franklin was the most properly rated coach. He often beat every team that he was supposed to. This year, hey, 3-week blip, it happens. But there is no edge to being the first major job open. So when we fired Franklin, we don't really get too much of an edge outside of, hey, we know that we need a head coach. We can now really vet some guys. But a lot of the coaches that we're going for are still playing in the season. We're going to have to wait till December to make a hire regardless of what's going on, or figure out an announcement ahead of time and something that's never been done before. But what we did do is we allowed James Franklin to have a huge edge in being the only major candidate that could entirely focus his point onto the coaching search. So he's made inroads already with places like Virginia Tech and some other schools down in the South. And so, like, Lane Kiffin can't go and do that right now. Lane Kiffin can't go look at the LSU or Florida job right now because he's trying to get Ole Miss to the playoff. James Franklin has none of those concerns. He is already going through and thinking about who am I hiring for staff, what kind of resources am I going to get from a program, and who is out there that I can go get to add to whatever roster I go and join. So I think by the time December 1st hits, he is going to be at a P4 job. And that's great for the duty to mitigate clause. That was going to happen regardless of whether we fired him way back when or at the end of the season. And so he's going to have the resources needed to compete. And so what I'm worried about is that we've now allowed time for, there's been no, like, one of the main points of firing Franklin when we did was pulling the plane out of the nosedive that we were in and saying, hey, let's make sure this plane doesn't hit the ground and get any permanent damage. That didn't happen. We didn't win any games. We didn't go in and upset Iowa. We didn't upset Ohio State. We didn't upset Indiana. And now we have to win out just to make bowl eligibility. So I have a fear of this roster getting poached, especially by Franklin, saying, hey, I'm going to go to Virginia Tech or I'm going to go somewhere else, and I'm going to take for anywhere from 5 to 12 players from this roster and say, hey, you know what I can do and what I built. Let's go here. Let's get a new aura around what we're doing and go and succeed. But also what we've allowed to do is we've allowed the vultures to circle this program now for about 2 months and know that your recruiting class in 26 and 27, which is still probably the most underrated aspect of all this, is just utterly falling apart. We've had over double-digit either decommitments or recruits reopening their commitment. And all that's going to come down to the coach that gets hired. But with that taking such a huge hit, you are going to put such a huge emphasis on the portal. And can you get your coach in there in time? Like, if you would have waited till the end of the season to do the Franklin, it would have been a pretty big cluster, but a lot of clusters would have been happening everywhere. You sort of would have gotten pushed into the storm. Instead, you are now just an outlier who everyone can see and everyone can look and say, oh, Chaz Coleman, hey, if we go offer him an NIL bag, maybe he'll come here. Darius Dixon, a bunch of other talented young players now, like, have been circled by boards on other programs. So I think when we fired James Franklin, when we did, was an utter disaster. There was no benefit at the time, and we'll see if the grass is greener, but hindsight's 2020. But I think the more I'm looking back on it, the more I get, the more fear I have about what this means for Penn State long term.
Yeah, I'll push back on this one a little bit, and I don't know how much this matters in terms of the season, but I will say this, something like I think the fans would have been much more checked out. Like, I don't think we have as many people show up to Indiana if James Franklin's the head coach. I think the mindset of the team is still in a much different place. I think, they're coming out to not the team being booed, but James Franklin being booed. There's a lot more animosity around. So I do think we've seen a rally. I think we've seen the team come out with more energy and look like they're having fun again playing football. And that was even from the start of Iowa, just that we've gotten that from Terry Smith. So I will say that. And I do think no matter what, if James Franklin were to have been fired the day after, Rutgers, so November 30th, I don't know how much that was keeping, I think guys are going to decommit. It would just been a lot more of a sped up process. But I think, come on, Spell. I think all these in-state PA guys in the 2026 class are still probably going to decommit. It was just going to happen in a 3-day span versus, the month and a half, 2 months that we gave them to have this time to think. But I think you make some good points about that. It kind of destabilized this program a bit because how important James Franklin was to Penn State compared to LSU and Auburn, and you see those classes, the 2026 classes, they're even gaining recruits. You got their Rivals is interviewing these guys, and they're saying, oh yeah, it was kind of whatever when those coaches got fired, and so I see that, and it's like maybe we were better off without James Franklin. But my biggest pushback on that would just be the animosity and just the almost hate from the fans would have just continued to grow, and I think that's the pressure that Pat Kraft felt, even though that we still have not won a game, as you said. I think there was just so much turmoil from that James Franklin relationship, and donors and boosters, those people that are very important, would have continued to just say, look, I'm not supporting this, is going to be an issue. So I think from a fan standpoint and a booster standpoint, it would be a lot harder to rally the troops kind of quicker. But from a team standpoint and keeping these guys together and not losing as many guys in the portal and losing as many recruits, I do agree with you that we'd probably be in a better standpoint if we would have kept James Franklin until after that Rutgers game. All right, my next overreaction, possibly, that 4 to 5 losses could be the new normal if Penn State specifically does not change the way that they do business. And that is in a sense of if we refuse to dive into the transfer portal heavy, if we refuse, I think this is the biggest one, to pay 4 and 5 star athletes the money that they are getting from other schools, because that was the biggest issue. We got all these, 5-star this past summer. We got guys from Philly going to USC and Ohio State, and what I'm hearing is like we're offering half. We're offering half of what these other schools are offering because we just refuse to play that game. And so I guess my question is what was that James Franklin, or is that just the way that Penn State's going to operate? I do think that was a piece of why Pat Kraft also wanted to split off from James Franklin, is because the loyalty to his players, and he was saying, hey, we got to play a different game. But that's my take. I guess if we don't change our ways for these next couple years, and we are going to, no matter what, have to rely on the transfer portal this year, is 4 and 5 losses the norm if we get into a rut where we got to pick up 40, 50 transfer portal players, and then next thing you know, that doesn't really work out, and now you're in this situation where it's just you just constantly turning over and you can't build a great roster. Because I think you look around college football, all these teams, yes, Ohio State, Julian Sayin, technically a transfer, although he was only at Alabama for 10 days, and you got Caleb Downs, but the core of these rosters are these really good teams are still built through high school recruiting classes. So that's why I say there is a real possibility that Penn State could be living as this is the new norm for a couple years.
I think that is close to a proper reaction. I'm going to push back just a little bit and just saying the portal is a dangerous game. It's like walking into a casino. You're playing roulette. You can put your money on black. You can put your money on red. You can decide, hey, I'm going to put some money on the numbers. And it all depends on how that roulette sort of swings for you that year. So I think 4 to 5 is with much more closer to the range of expectations now than what they were. But it all just sort of depends, like, hey, Grunkemeyer finally showed some glimpses. Can we keep him in there? We do have some good young offensive line players. We're still going to have good players on defense. So if you can go in and hit the portal class, a la like Mike Norvell, like I think Mike Norvell is sort of like the perfect encapsulation of, hey, when hitting the portal correctly, you can win the ACC, be 13-1, and if your quarterback doesn't get injured, you're probably in the playoff and one of the big contenders there. Or you hit it wrong the very next cycle, and all of a sudden 2-10 is staring you in the face. So 4 and 5 is obviously the median of that. I would agree with you on that point. It's still Penn State. The Big Ten is still pretty wide open outside of Ohio State and Oregon. I can't say that any of these teams have long-term stability. I love what Cignetti's done at Indiana. Can he just keep doing it year after year after he skips so many steps? All of his James Madison guys finally leave. Michigan, hey, you have Underwood. You think that's going to go well, but can you put talent around him? And then who else is there to jump up in the Big Ten? So I think, my light died. So I think that there is a situation in which you can look at 4 and 5 being a likelihood, but if you hit on this portal class, our schedule next year is really, really good. So if you can get the right players in for this upcoming year and you hit another spike year and that head coach comes in with momentum and can quickly rebuild recruiting, I could see us just sort of skipping over that tier. But to your point, if we do fail in that category, it could go really, really bad and really, really south. So where I'm almost disagreeing is that, 4 and 5 is probably the more expected. Could be worse. It could go the other way. So there's a huge range of outcomes is what I'm saying. And so saying like, hey, we can stay at the 8 and 4, you hope that's the floor. But there is certainly a circumstance to where we can go into next year, we hit on the portal class because the coach that we hired knows that has to be a focus. Like there's no argument that the transfer portal needs to be a huge component of Penn State's roster in 2026. So when we do that, we really have to hope that we go and like that has to be nailed. If it's not, then we are looking, I think, at your scenario. If we hit, I think we can sort of skid past the dark area and get over the gravel road before we hit pavement again.
Jesse, your next overreaction.
I think for the upcoming head coach, we've talked a lot about roster and roster attrition and everything like that. Obviously, we had a lot of seniors going on. Am I overreacting? I think the next Penn State head coach is going to have more issues off the field than they are on the field. So what I'm saying there is, yes, you're going to have to replace all your players going to either the NFL draft or losing their eligibility. And you might get hit by the portal. You might have some players get poached. You might have to rebuild your recruiting class. And all that's fine and well. But on the field, like Penn State's still going to have a relative talent edge over people. You're still going to have the ability to go out and hire good staff. My issues right now is what's happening to our NIL. I don't really know how much is out there, but NIL and the alignment that James Franklin had been calling for previously, like people sort of intertwine those as meaning the same thing. It's not. He was looking for program alignment from the president to the AD to himself. And it wasn't until Kraft came in and they got a new president that all that stuff sort of happened. But their NIL picture right now, they're nowhere close to the top 10. And you can make an argument that they're barely at the bottom of the B tier. And in this new modern day of college football, like you have to wonder how attractive the job is if you don't have your NIL line. Like you can make an argument, like look at what Texas Tech just did. They got their NIL way up. They got a huge class in, and they're probably going to be a playoff team this year. And they're going to be able to keep doing it because that backing is going to be there year after year after year. And we've always been saying, hey, Penn State's playing catch up in NIL. They're playing catch up. But a lot of that was with James Franklin. Is this new coach going to be able to come in and galvanize the fan base and galvanize the NIL coffers to be able to really put the money into this roster that we need to in order to have success? And I don't know about that. So I think we're going to be looking for a football coach to do stuff X's and O's on the field. But in a way, like the CEO archetype at Penn State is really needed because there is not just, I just can't go to a billionaire over here and say, hey, I need a 5-star quarterback. Can you get me him? We haven't seen anyone really step up into that role. So when you look at the NIL and overall, like the issues with the president right now and where we are just in general in terms of off the field sort of administrative stuff, I'm a little bit concerned as to that being the major issue for a head coach, as opposed to, hey, on the field, it's Penn State. We should be able to win football games. I think people are sort of looking past that because of the logo and the idea that we're a form of a blue blood. And in the past we have been. And I hope that continues. But right now, all the off the field stuff is so much more concerning to me than what's happening on the field.
Yeah, so I'll push back on this a little bit, and I'll say the reason why I think we won't have as many issues and I think we will get a lot more NIL support is that there was a large group of the big-time donors that weren't backing James Franklin for whatever reason they may have had. And so I think that was another reason that Pat Kraft wanted to go another direction, is he wanted to get the full support from all the Penn State money, not just half of it. So I think if you do hit on this next head coach that gets not only the fans excited, but the donors excited again, I think you can find some more of that NIL support and more of that money. I don't think we're ever going to spend as much as, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Ohio State, Alabama, but I think you start to be able to find maybe some more of that support when you don't have James Franklin at the helm. So I guess that would be my main thought there. But I do agree with you. No matter what, we are going to continue to not be able to stack up with the top teams from that standpoint. And I think a big piece of it is also, which GM do you hire? You have to hit on that. You have to hit on someone that knows how to manage all of this, because I think that was another issue, is that James Franklin was running all of it. And he had people, whether it was him or someone else on this staff, that was, operating as far as the GM, and they didn't know how to do that. They had no experience doing that, and that caused issues for Penn State's roster management and money management as a whole. So if you bring in a GM and you allow the GM to meet and, talk to, Terry Pagula and all these big time, donors, I think that could get them a little bit more, enthused to say, okay, I'm going to give some money. I'm going to get behind this because I like the GM. I like the head coach. I'm willing to throw $2 million into this pot for whatever you need. So that would be my pushback. But I do agree with the fact that we are still going to be playing behind in the sense of NIL compared to these other top teams. All right, Jesse, my overreaction. Penn State isn't going to have as big of a roster turnover as most people think. In a sense of, a lot of people are thinking 40, 50, maybe even 60 players out of the transfer portal is what Penn State is looking at from January 2nd to when the portal closes. I don't know. Are we giving James Franklin too much credit for the fact that that's why majority of this roster came here? Are we just assuming that young freshmen like Alex Tash and Darius Dixon are going to leave like without a doubt, and Chaz Coleman and Ivan Kemiju and all those guys? Or are they here because, are they going to stay because Penn State's comfortable? Are we going to maybe be able to retain Ty Howell and Terry Smith with this next head coach that can keep some of those young talented players around? So I don't know. That's my take. I think maybe we are overreacting in that sense. Your thoughts?
I'm going to push back here. It's always a possibility, but I think ultimately when you look at it, with the recruiting class turning into what it has, and the timeline. The calendar has really put us in a really bad situation. I think when you look at all the jobs across the country that are open right now, Penn State is the one that really needs to nail its coaching hire, its GM hire, and its portal strategy in this upcoming year to stay where they want to, because players were committing to James Franklin. You aren't seeing those max exoduses of recruits from Florida, LSU. You sort of alluded to this earlier. Like all of them are sort of in Auburn. All those guys are just saying, okay, well, let's wait and see who the new head coach is. You just notice that a lot of our guys are just like, oh man, they did that to Franklin. Like, well, he was the reason. He was the family guy that I wanted to go play for. He's what made Penn State attractive. So I'm going to push back in saying that, but it comes with caveats. I think you have to look at what head coach is coming in. How much of his roster is he bringing with him? Is he bringing his recruiting classes in? Because if he is, then I don't really consider that attacking the transfer portal in the same. It's sort of like, hey, it's a package deal. Hey, I'm Eli Drinkwitz. I'm coming to Penn State, for example, and I'm going to be bringing Zollers. I'll bring a couple of the players on the defense. I'll bring a couple of offensive skill players with me. So not only am I going to get Drinkwitz and whatever parts of his staff he wants to bring with him, but he's going to bring in 12 to 15 players with him. Well, that greatly reduces what we have to do in the transfer portal. But then also, hey, part of my recruiting class may follow me. So I may be bringing 12 players on my roster. I may be bringing in another 8 to 10 recruits potentially, whether it's in, obviously the calendar is what really makes this really tough, because when is Drinkwitz's last game is November 28th, November 29th, something like that. You're going to have about a 3 or 4 day period before signing day happens. And when, like, unless you get kids decommit and say, hey, I'm not making my decision for the early signing day this year, there's just not that runway to really make sure that I have an option to build this team through anything but the transfer portal. And I hope that we can retain the good players on our team. But how much of the NIL focus is going to be on that? How long is it going to take for a GM or a head coach to come in and discern that? Because there is no head coach that we're looking at right now who's already actively working that up. They're working on the season. Now you're starting to see some coaches get eliminated from playoff contention, and you might start to see that. But it all depends on who we hire and what the decision is that we make. I hope that we keep those good young players, and I hope that we aren't getting 60 players out of the portal. I hope it's closer to 40 or 30. But I don't think there's any way that number goes lower than that unless you just start to have – unless you get a just groundbreaking hire that none of us sees coming that really just brings so much of a roster and recruiting class with them. And I don't think in this day and age – that players are as tied to the coach, but James Franklin is like the exception here because we've seen it now with our recruiting class. So I really hope that people understand what Penn State is right now. It's been a very good job, but with each passing day, there are jobs open that have their recruiting classes intact, that have talented rosters, that have the NIL needed to go and compete for playoff games. That's a little bit in question for Penn State right now. So I hope that, like, you and I both want Penn State to continue to succeed. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. I don't like doing that, but I'm often more of a pessimist than I am an optimist. And in this particular circumstance, I just sort of want to send a warning out saying, expect huge turnover. I hope it's not true, but I don't see many pieces of this coaching staff coming back. Like maybe a Terry Smith, maybe a Phil Trotwine, or a couple of position coaches, but I expect complete overhaul with whoever comes in because they want to put their people in. A GM's going to want to come in and put their people in. And I think Pat Kraft's going to give that new head coach and GM every opportunity to do that. But that is going to mean that you're churning over this roster. So I'm going to have to push back on that and say, I think that you're underreacting to that particular circumstance. I hope it's not true, but I don't really see much of a way around it with where Penn State currently is right now. And us continuing to lose games. Like we might not even have bowl prep to be able to help keep players in here. That's going to unlock the roster even more so. We have to go and win our next 3 games just to make a bowl. So you're not keeping that roster intact. They could all just say on November 28th, November 29th, whatever our last game is against Rutgers. I think you said November 30th against Rutgers. If we don't win the next 3 games, all those players are just free to walk. There's no bowl prep. There's no practice. There's nothing else for them to keep them on to this roster and say, hey, we have something to fight for. So I hope we win the next 3 games. I hope that all happens and we can do that. But that's a lot of I hope. And like I said, I'm a pessimist, not an optimist when it comes to this. I like to be realistic and say, hey, I'd rather be operating on the bottom baseline as opposed to the top baseline. Because if you're operating on the top baseline, you're often going to be disappointed or not have planned for what is actually going to be the bottom baseline.
Yeah, I think you made a good point, too, on just the calendar. It's a race against the calendar. I think college football needs to, and the NCAA needs to rework this. Early signing day used to be the 16th or 17th of December. I don't know why we moved it up to the 3rd it creates such a time crunch. And I think you're going to see more and more. And it depends when the coaching changes happen, but anybody that has a coaching change after December 3rd, you're going to see more of those Julian Sands situations where someone's at a place for 10 days before they enter the transfer portal again. And so I think that's something to look at too. NCAA needs to look at that and find a way to fix it. But I do agree with you that
calendar is utterly broken in college football. I mean, we have essentially think about the NFL. The NFL has its calendar perfectly well set. We finished the Super Bowl in February. We have the draft in April, and we have free agency in the summer. Well, we have our free agency and our draft and recruiting in the portal as the playoffs are happening. It makes no sense. Coaching carousel, like December has always been the most hectic month, and with the signing day where it's at, and now also one of the things of the calendar that's really going to hurt us is that there is no spring portal window this year. There's just a singular portal window in January. So there isn't that time for that head coach to come in, do the first portal window, go through spring practice and be like, okay, hey, these are the weak spots in our roster. We need to go address this. So like for a new head coach, the change in that calendar is going to be even more so important because you're not going to have we got Trevor Pena in the spring portal window. There's no way to identify, our blank position room is going to be weak. And now we have the opportunity to go and get someone else from another team. Like that window is just not there. So your rosters are going to be finalized by the second week of January, where that head coach may only have been there for a month. So just the condense of the calendar and how idiotic it is. I wish there was leadership in the NCAA and college football to go and fix it, but it puts us even more so behind the eight ball because the calendar is not benefiting us in any way whatsoever this year. It's not benefiting anyone really. So I hope it gets fixed, but that's a conversation for another day about how to fix college football. Not that it needs fixing, but there are just some clear and abhorrent issues that are happening that just make no sense. I was about to swear, and I'm not sure if it's but it makes no sense.
It's all right. Maybe we need we might need a college football commissioner. I don't know. We have someone that's
I wonder who could do that sort of stuff.
Jesse, I appreciate you joining me. This is a very fun exercise we're able to go through, and I think it put a lot of the big overall question marks around this Penn State team out there on the forefront. So I appreciate you joining me as always. You got anything final for these people?
Stay with it. Let's continue to root on the team for the final 3 games. Hopefully we can get some wins in here and just sort of try to get positive momentum. In terms of the one thing that people are probably like, hey, you guys didn't talk at all about coaches. There's not really too much to say on the coaching front. We're still sort of steadily progressing. Just want to sort of throw out that there are some other names that are starting to emerge, but nothing concrete. Guys like Clark Lee's name has started to come up. Obviously, Matt Rule's been eliminated. So I think you're probably looking towards some of those SEC coaches, but we'll see how many jobs open up. So ultimately, I'm still going to be pounding the table for a guy like Matt Campbell. He had 7 walk-on freshmen at the play for Iowa State last weekend, and they still beat TCU. So he has I'll still pound the table for him, but Clark Lee, Eli Drinkwitz, all those guys still in play. But ultimately, we have about 3 or 4 more weeks until those answers come, unless we have some sort of historic announcement to where X coach will continue to finish out the season with their team. But upon the conclusion of their season, they will be signing as a new head coach of Penn State. That's never happened, but it's sort of something that agents are expecting to happen at some point. It's just who's going to be the mold breaker and go through and do that first sort of activation and hire like that. So if there is any coaching news, I'll hop back on with you, Landon. We'll talk about it. As soon as Penn State gets hires a new head coach, I'm sure we'll probably go an hour plus on it because that's going to decide the next 5 to 10 years of Penn State's future. So all in all, patience, continue to support the program, enjoy your Thanksgiving, go eat some turkey, and don't let Penn State football wind you up too much. It's just a game. It's a game that we love. And if you want the Penn State program to get better, figure out how to support their NIL, figure out how to go and support the players in other ways than just watching the football games.
Perfectly put. Producer Jesse, thanks so much for joining us today.